Hello, we should be live right now. So this is another, I would say, very lately announced Distributist Answers or Disants series. One of the additions I have. So again, I've been on, I will say, vacation for the Christmas season, and I've just gotten back, and it's going to take a little bit of a time to get the podcast and everything else back on schedule. I've been making videos while I've been gone, but at the same time, I know that every Sunday I usually have scheduled either a Dist Ans section where I do an Ask Me Anything or one of the podcasts. So this is just a good time to have people ask their questions and I can answer them, and I can give also prognostications and my feeling about what the dynamic is going to be in the culture and on the right going forward into 2019. So I think it's a good thing to do this afternoon, this Sunday afternoon. I don't have anything else going on, and I'm glad to see that they've got people here. One brief announcement. I have another video that's premiering in about an hour and a half. People might have seen this. It might even be a little bit surprised to see that I'm live streaming before this, but I'm experimenting with doing this, having a Ask Me Anything ahead of a video premiere, maybe to make people interested in the video that I'm premiering, or just to answer questions ahead of time. I don't know. Most of YouTube's experimentation, so you just do what you can. At any rate, any questions you guys have, anything you want me to address from the news, I think this is a great time to do it. I'll be on air for about an hour and a half. And then I think the actual produced video will air, so I'll probably end the live stream around then. Again, it's yes, this is an attempt to hype things. I noticed one person saying, if you need any music for your content, I've got music you can use for free, from Julia Savola. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that offer. It's always hard because I don't usually have theme music in my videos. I think that at some point I'm going to have to create a new intro, so I might need music to that in that capacity. And in that case, I'll have to I might be looking for music, so I might have to take you up on the offer. But thank you very much for the question and the offer. Um, so I have the first super chat. I'll just answer them as they come. So YJHVY for $5 American. Thank you for your contribution. Says, what did a nation of people look like before the nation state? That's a good question. I think there were a concept of peoples. There were a concept of, I don't want to say, the thing is, a lot of times when people criticize things like the nuclear family, they're so, oh, it's a new thing. It's a construction of the modern era. Well, what they really mean it was based on a primordial version of itself, which is more or less everything. And the nation is no exception. Now, when it comes to nationalism and the way that we think of it, that really started in the 19th century. But before that, there was a concept of peoples, right? There was, I mean, in England's a great example of this. The Austro-Hungarian Empire are a great example of this. The Welsh and the Scots and the English were all different peoples. This was recognized during. I'm drinking a beverage, trying to keep the more casual tone in place. But all these people were seen as different peoples. They had their own culture, they had their own language, and yet they were all unified under one crown for an incredible amount of their own history. Now, sometimes this was done by conquest, as, the whole conflict between William Wallace and the likes, but for a lot of times it was just done because the ruling monarchs of all the nations were the same person. If you know the Union Jack is actually the superposition of the English flag, the Welsh flag, and the Scottish cross. And this is because I think it was the Stuarts were simultaneously kings of all three countries, of all three peoples, and this became the United Kingdom. Now, I think this is something that was more or less the case when you looked everywhere. France and also Austria, there would be a lot of different people who would be located within a certain empire based on the noble family that ruled them. And the rights, and this is really where the idea of rights came from, is that the people would have certain rights of self-preservation within that system. Oftentimes I say that, considering that, the fact that ethnically European people are going to become the minority in most countries in the next 100 years, really a lot of the focus of the right has to be to figure out what kind of minorities ethnically European people are going to be. Because it's really important that we find our way to be a minority, say for instance, like the Hungarians were a minority in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and less a minority like the Jewish people were in Russia. You don't want to be a minority that has everything where something goes wrong and everyone just implicitly blames it on you. Like, if there was a budget deficit in Russia, they would blame the Jews, right? And the fear, and I think the fear is vindicated by a lot of people of ethnically European persuasion in the West, is that the way academia is going, ethnically European people are getting set up to be a minority where everything gets blamed on them. And I think this is very concerning. Bringle Dingle says, are you planning on posting your chat with Paul Vanderklay? Yes, it's going to be the next Via Obscura, which is going to start up next week. Blackjack said it was England, Ireland, and Scotland. Wales was not represented. I'm sorry, Blackjack. I think that's wrong. Ireland was not part of the United Kingdom. It was conquered by Oliver Cromwell. I'm pretty sure it was Wales. Maybe someone who's more knowledgeable can link me an article and I'll read it. But I'm pretty sure that it was the Scottish cross, the English cross, and the and the Welsh flag. But check me on that. So just to finish off the last super chat about nationalism. Being a cohesive people does not mean that you have to have a nationalist government. You can accomplish this. You can negotiate it with powers that are not themselves nationalists. The monarchies of the old world were not nationalist forces. They comprised a lot of different diverse peoples. Yet, I think they would have had a hard time ruling if they had not said, okay, look, you're the people who live in this area. We are your kings, but part of our duty to you as subjects is to make sure that your culture and people persist, even if we are the ones ruling over you. This is sort of part of the duty between king and subject. Now, and you see this between the Germans and the Hungarians inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, I think a lot of times people worry about having an imperial structure, but I think it's, for the most part, it's been something that's been the natural state of the human creature. And if you look at the Christian era, you'll see that Europe's biggest period of ethnic stability, which is, Europe is a very tumultuous place and it had a lot of migration into it and out of it. But in between 800 AD or 800 or 1000 AD and 1900 AD, Europe had an incredibly stable demographic population. It's those 1,000 years were probably the most stable years the continent had ever experienced. And those were the years where Christendom reigned in Europe. And it wasn't that Christianity was implicitly nationalist. It was that the civilization that was built by Christianity allowed for a stability that was enjoyed by the peoples who put it together. And only now that we've sort of deconstructed Europe and replaced the idea of Christendom with secular ideas like nationalism and socialism and communism, and we've completely secularized, does the ethnic stability seem like it might be going back to something like Europe was in the Dark Ages, where you just have massive influxes of different peoples that totally replace the population of a country. I mean, it wouldn't be historically unprecedented, but it would be, for the time that we've understood civilization to thrive, it would be very, very unusual. So thank you for that super chat. I'm going to go on to the next one by Joe Lohengram for $10 American. Thank you for your contribution. Do you think Romanticism as a movement was more right or left wing? There were liberal elements in it, but it seems to me the modern left hates it. All of my leftist professors hate Romanticism. Oh boy, this is a big topic. Romanticism has problems with it, and I'm going to explain my problems, but I'll try to take a swing at your question in the most direct sense first. Certainly in comparison, okay, I mean, it's complicated because Romanticism had a counter-enlightenment direction to it. And in that sense, it did sort of support reactionary ideas, skepticism towards classical ideas that you could plan everything out, that kind of reached their apex in the French Revolution and puttered out. An emphasis over the spiritual, over things that are strictly modernistic notions of calculation and formalism. Pardon me. Strictly formalistic expressions that you see a lot in the classical era. So in that sense, there was something counter-progressive about Romanticism. However, the idea that Romanticism always threatens to overflow into emotivism, the idea that emotions drive everything, and in some sense, it was deeply. Romanticism was a kind of a revolutionary type movement, and it was anti-status quo. I don't know if you think that makes it left or right, in the sense that it had counter-enlightenment elements. Certainly, there are some right-wing dimensions to it, and of course, the Romanticism was a lot, and there was a huge connection between that and sort of burgeoning nationalist movements of the 19th century. Okay, but I think the more interesting question is like why. I'm sure all your leftist professors hate Romanticism. And I'm sure that most people who are professors or who are writers hate Romanticism. And that's because I think Romanticism has a lot of problems with it. Now, I know that for young people, especially young men, Romanticism has like this very, very direct appeal. It's sort of simple. It engages with our emotions and with our desires in a very, very primal way. We all know sort of the feeling of kind of like looking out into the world and getting swept up in these scenes and feeling like the incompleteness of Earth is somehow kind of like beautiful and sweeping. The difficulty with Romanticism as an art form is that it never was really able to confront the criticism that it was not being honest about the nature of the universe or the nature of the human being. And it sort of became this thing where like people consumed it sort of as entertainment, but it was hard to say what you could really learn from a purely romantic piece of fiction or a purely romantic piece of art, because it seemed to be this saying that like the world is this beautiful, tumultuous place, and isn't it amazing? And it's dark, but it's dark in this beautiful, sexy way. Most of the darkness in the world isn't sexy, the way that Romanticism portrays it. And so as soon as Romanticism became a thing, people started casting around for solutions to the problem. And most of the great romantic novels that we have, what they do is they borrow from other genres. Specifically, they try to make it gothic. So they emphasize sort of like the dimension of incompleteness, and they emphasize the darkness in the human soul, and or they try to make it realist. Jane Austen, in many ways, could be seen as sort of an anti-romantic author, right? I mean, obviously she was writing around the period where Romanticism was really, really popular, but it wasn't. Her topic was really to emphasize, I think, Jane Austen and George Eliot and a lot of other people. They wrote about people who liked romantic novels in order to demonstrate that it really isn't about these epic gestures or epic moments that kind of like convey this distinct emotional appeal. It's more being good people. It's more doing the boring little things. The goodness or badness of people kind of are contained within small gestures. I think that's more or less what Jane Austen was trying to communicate, and it's something that it can really get lost in a lot of romantic portrayals of the universe. I see someone asking me here, what's your opinion of Oliver Cromwell? I have a very low opinion of Oliver Cromwell. He was anti-Catholic. He was anti-monarchist. Not that I'm like a huge monarchist, but my impression was that he was a pig-headed ignoramus who was anti-Catholic. I'm sure he had some very fine qualities, but I don't know. I'm not so sure. In many ways, Oliver Cromwell seemed like the prototype of the SJW. I mean, like he was like the 17th century version of an SJW Antifa guy. Okay, so the Bookkeep 7 gives me $5 as a pure contribution. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm going to keep on going down, seeing if there's any more questions. Thanks for the question, guys. I didn't really have tons to talk about today. I was going to talk a little bit about prospects for the YouTube right going forward into 2019. But I think that probably is going to, I don't know, I'll probably make a video on it. It's not, I'm probably just checking on how many people are watching. That's a fair number. It'll probably wait till the end of this video before I kind of give a little bit of a spiel on it. At any rate, going down the list here, excuse me, lost my train of thought. Okay. Some more super chats here. So $10 from Reactionary Coalition. Thank you very much for your contribution. Is it possible to have counter-enlightenment republic in the U.S. or whatever breaks off from it? Think of the Italian merchant republic. If not, what is the easiest solution? Well, I don't know. And I probably will talk a little bit about this. I mean, like, okay, if the United States government breaks down and like you have a total breakdown, like anything is possible. I mean, most likely, I mean, in these total breakdown scenarios, things usually get pretty bad. So it's not something any of us should really be looking forward to, but it's not pretty. And you should expect something like warlords, or something else like that, or maybe some other, maybe corporatist kind of ruling where it's just directly done by moneyed interests. Ruling is directly done by moneyed interests. By counter-enlightenment republic, I mean, I don't know what that really means. I mean, Venice, the Italian merchant republics, by which I think you mean Venice, right? Or things like Venice. Those weren't really counter-enlightenment. They were more pre-enlightenment. The idea, I mean, and at that point, I think if you were to just kind of describe Venetian government, I mean, it would essentially be less like something that was, it was in like Mencius Mollbug's idea of corporate, like basically replacing the government with like a stock corporation. It was basically like voting by, it was like ruled by the upper middle class, essentially ruled by the merchant class. Most people would not recognize that as a republic in the modern terminology, at least in the modern vocabulary. So I don't know. I mean, you might as well just say that, like, you know, this corporation owns the government now, because that would be effectively what a counter-enlightenment merchant republic like Venice would be. But maybe we'll talk about implementation, and you know, I'm sure it's a whole other can of worms. QWERTY for Canadian $10. Thank you very much. What do you think of the talk about America heading towards a cold civil war? Do you agree? If yes, are you worried about an eventual hot civil war? What would that event look like? Well, I think we are kind of heading towards a cold civil war. I don't know. I think the left thinks it's won already. You know, I mean, this is the thing. The left thinks it has won. And they're not stupid people. I think they've miscalculated. But in order for, I mean, let's just, you know, and I've heard this from, I think I've explained this several times before on this channel, but I'm going to talk about it yet again. I know people, and I need to talk to John Mark. He's a new YouTuber. I'd call him a reactionary, although I think he associates himself more as a propertarian, from the school that Kurt Doolittle is creating. And he says something along the lines of course, the right's going to win a civil war. We have all the guns. Well, not really. I mean, you have a bunch of guns that are like hunting rifles and handguns and stuff like that, right? They're not super effective for fighting a war, and moreover, guns come from factories in China, right? Like, so, and you can put a lot of guns on one of those huge, cargo ships that they carry, those huge ocean liners they carry across the ocean. So like if you kick off like a hot civil war, right? Like, and your enemies in Blue America have allies in China. Like 2 cargo ships dock in San Francisco Bay, all of a sudden Blue America has more weapons. Like, so it can't be just weapons. And of course, Blue America will also have a lot of young people too. So that plus boot camp will get them an army that they can win with. Now, you're right in the sense that, Red America, if there was a hot civil war, it would be more mobilized. But then you're playing the, well-mobilized, on-the-ground right-wing force versus an unstoppable economic engine that just needs to get into motion before it buries you. I don't know. Haven't you heard this story before? I feel like I have. I mean, it's essentially the story of like World War II and the Civil War. And in both cases, which side wins. And I think the Progressive Coalition believes that it just has this one, right? I think they may have miscalculated. I think they might be leaning too much on technology. But I don't think that a solution is going to come in the form of some kind of like civil war. Just descriptively, I don't think it's going to occur. I think what's going to happen is that the Progressive Coalition is going to crack, and then a new counter-progressive coalition is going to form. And that new counter-progressive coalition is going to be comprised of a variety of different identitarian groups that do not like what the progressives want. And they're going to be the one that redesign the next era of American history. And that realignment may lead to a collapse, but it's going to be much more complicated than Gettysburg Part 67, right? And I mean, who would want to do that, right? Like it just, it would totally depend on who controlled the military, because, the United States military is not going to allow the warheads, the nuclear arsenal of America to fall into like a militia's hands. And then they can those generals can call any amount of force down. Patrick for $10. The fluidity immigration brings challenges. Okay, I'm going to try to paraphrase. The fluidity immigration brings challenges to the balance of individual rights and collective interests. I can't marry the two ideas because of immigration. Any thoughts? Have you been able to marry the two? Individual rights and collective interests. Have you been able to marry individual rights and collective interests? Is that what you mean? I'm collecting my thoughts, guys. My answer to that question is I don't like the dichotomy between individualism and collectivism. I know that I owe Academic Agent a debate or something on the topic, and Denny Duchamp as well. But the idea that individual rights and collective rights are separated is part of the problem. I mean, and really, it comes down to education, right? Like, so what is education, right? Like, who has the right to decide what we get to teach in the schools? And is that an individual right? And if it's an individual right, whose right is it? And if you don't have the ability to teach the next generation, what do you even really have in the long term? Your long-term power base totally erodes. If nothing else, if you can't at least teach the individual rights are primary, you've got no power base. And so you see, as soon as you go in that direction, you realize that the individualism versus collectivism thing doesn't really make any sense. Most individuals their primary interest, most individuals of worth at least, their primary interests is not of their own rights, but of things that they can give forward to their children. And part of the desperation of our present sorry, part of the frustration of our present era is the fact that, well, individual goods, consumer goods are very, very cheap. All of the capital items that we kind of want to hand on to the next generation, education, real estate, cultural heritage, those are all getting more and more and more expensive. So people have less and less and less that they can pay forward. And that's what I think that's what's driving our current unhappiness crisis, is the inability to come up with meaning that has meaning or power that extends beyond the individual person. And that's one of these things. I mean, I don't know. I think how would I marry the two? Here's how I marry the two, between individual and collectivism. The individuals of worth's chief principle is posterity and right practice of religion, right? They are to preserve the true, the goodness, and the true, the good, and the beautiful that lies in correct faith, and then they are to transmit that faith to the next generation, and to make sure that the next generation has the best. The next generation and all following generations, our posterity, are well taken care of, have their property intact, and that's the critical dimension. If your individual interests is not that, if your individual interests are that, then I endorse your efforts as an individual and your rights. But if your individual efforts are just pure hedonism, and I think this is one of the ways our founding fathers never really, they never really imagined that people would culture would develop that would be purely hedonistic. If you're just like, well, my individual goal in life is just to play video games and smoke pot, like, I don't care, and I don't think society should care either. As far as I'm concerned, you're not even part of society. You're just trying to use society for your ends, to whatever extent that you can get away with it. So thank you for your super chat, Patrick. That is, yeah, it's Patrick for $10. Okay, the Big Bad Rascal for $5. Super chat. Thank you for your contribution. Do you have any thoughts about China soon to become the most Christian country in the world? I mean, this is maybe a controversial thing. I really respect non-Western Christians, but for Western Christians, I don't think that this is going to make a big impact. I think that China is going to have its own. And this is a big problem for the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church has a problem with the fact that the Catholicism being spread in China is a heretical version of Catholicism. In many cases, that's controlled by the Communist Party. That's a huge problem. And I mean, France has done nothing to stop this, and has taken a lot of steps to essentially sweep it under the rug. I really doubt that Christians in the West are really going to feel a difference. I think it's supremely spiritually relevant that China is becoming more and more Christian, but I don't think that that's going to be a panacea or going to even be largely felt inside America. I think that there are going to be increasingly numbers of Chinese immigrants into America, and if China is increasingly Christian, then perhaps a Christian counter-progressive coalition might be a unifying element that can be brought against the progressive coalition, because of the fact that many Chinese people will be, if not Christian themselves, comfortable with Christianity, and it will be a banner to rally around in the West. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's, I mean, we're essentially, in 100 years, there's only going to be we're essentially dropping the numbers of religions worldwide. In 100 years, I bet that the religions of the world are going to be communism, because I think that's still going to be around, Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity. And there's going to be sort of pinko versions of all four of those religions. I'm not really 100% on the orthodoxy, but I'm still kind of allied to them in sort of a secular halvesy sort of way. And I think the contests in the future are going to be those religions fighting over territory. Obviously, I think the globalist project. I mean, I guess that's, does that count? I suppose. I mean, the globalist project of desecularizing anything, I think, is going to start falling through quite significantly in the next 100 years. And I think that it's going to be something that's going to be, who knows? I shouldn't play like Nostradamus here. Maybe it'll work. Maybe George Soros has an undefeatable political coalition, and the money coming in from technology will always overwhelm and crush traditionalist forces, whether they're Islamic, African, or European. But I don't know. I see a lot of problems coming up, and I think that they have miscalculated, or I hope they have. And if not, there are other contingency plans that we can follow. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next super chat. So $5 for Reactionary Coalition. Do you think infiltration and subterfuge are more effective than civil war? As I like to call it, the Palpatine method. Palpatine method. That's the Emperor from Star Wars, right? I think. Palpatine. The word always seems weird. I'm pretty sure that's the Emperor from Star Wars. Yeah, I guess I would need specifics on infiltration and subterfuge. I think separation is the way to go. But I think that, as a matter of fact, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to get up and change my beverage really quickly, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Okay, so I'm trying to give this question sufficient thought here. Okay, so I don't think I think fighting a hot. Okay, so here's the thing. If you prepare for civil war and civil war doesn't happen, you've wasted your money. If you prepare for a civil war in the sense of buying guns, and a civil war does happen, and there's no organization, not only have you lost money, you're also dead. The big lack on the right is organization. The left has spent 100 years at this stage building their capacity to organize in public and in private people for left-wing causes. The right has none of this apparatus in place. And the task ahead of the right wing is to show that they have the ability to unify, to collectivize, to form a front against progressivism that can push back, that can defend people. Because right now, the progressive coalition can get anyone it wants fired. Fired, with a few exceptions like Fox News and Breitbart, who are out of their control, which are very small organizations when it really comes to the grand scheme of things. If the counter-progressive coalition can figure out a way to defend itself and network, then it's got a damn good chance of doing something. And to me, that means separation. So creating separate institutions apart from the progressive ones, and then organizing and building. Because the great thing about organizing and building is that, unlike preparing for a civil war, if civil war doesn't happen, and you still built something, right? You still built that charity organization. You still have that Rolodex of contacts. You still have a library of videos, or you've still written a book, or you've still created a speaking circuit that you can use, even in that is useful to your life, even in the event that the worst doesn't come to the worst. So I think you have to. That's the reason. And it's also essential for, if you. I don't like talking about hot civil wars, but if you were going to fight a hot civil war, like a bunch of isolated, atomized, trigger happy rednecks with AK, like with AR-15s, isn't going to win anything, and it's going to essentially destroy any coalitioning that would possibly give you power. So it just, without some kind of command structure, without very, very distinct networks, it's just not going to be feasible. Building is the solution for the right. So Sheen Zaleski for $2 says the military is apolitical and should remain so. Yeah, I mean, the military is somewhat apolitical. The military has not historically been apolitical. And if you're talking about like a hot civil war or something, like, the military can't remain. What a civil war does is it means that the military can't remain apolitical. And so generals will take up with one faction or the other. And we all know that generals' loyalty to certain constituencies inside partisan politics, when things get destabilized, as they do, like in Turkey, it's very, very important. I don't know if people remember this. Back in 2016, Erdogan had a rather serious coup attempt lifted against him by a bunch of his generals. And it was a very ineffective coup because it appeared that this was a desperation, that he was closing in on them. And this is their last ditch effort to keep the Erdoganists out of power. It was totally a failure, and he jailed them, and he replaced them in their command positions by people who were loyal to him. If we devolve in the way that looks like we're devolving, then the political positions of generals are going to be very, very relevant. Because if you know that, the top brass is Republican or red state, then the left knows that in the event of things going into chaos and a coup happening, again, like, hot civil war probably won't happen. A coup, that's much more likely. They know that they're not going to benefit from that in the slightest, and they're much more reluctant to push things forward. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Another one by YJHV. So I'll go over the super chats on my Creator Studio to make sure I didn't miss any towards the end of this talk, and we can go from there. YJHVY for $5. How do you assimilate Catholic immigrants' cultures to American culture without losing the Catholicism? Well, I mean, I think you mean by without losing the Protestantism. I mean, like, I'm going to say this, and I said this before. When this country decided to bring in people like me, it did lose a certain amount of its identity. And it lost a lot of its identity when it brought in Catholic immigrants like myself. And that is something that I have a hard time reconciling. Because I don't think that the WASP culture of this country, which is the real culture of America, is bad. It's one of the real cultures. I would say, like, the founding cultures of America are the Native American cultures who were here before the creation of America, the WASP culture who built this country and designed its founding documents, and then the African American cultures who were brought against their will. Those are the native cultures of America. And everyone else is more or less just an immigrant. But when Catholics were brought over, we did change the face of this country. Now, I think that, in our time here, there has been a bunch of native Catholic cultures. But I do have a desire to sort of end the Reformation and religiously correct people of a WASP persuasion so that they embrace the faith of their ancestors, which was the faith of Rome. But I don't have a desire to, like, bend Northern European white Anglo-Saxon culture to anything. I want that to take its own path. And I think it really has to. I hear people talk from England, and I hear people talk from the former British Empire, like Millennial Woes or Reactionary Expat. And I think, well, this is a type of culture that's really not my own. And it shouldn't be. I think for many reasons, we are and should forever be politically allied. We are a part of a project called European Christendom, and that means something. But I don't think it's the same. I think that for Catholics living in America, I just think it's going to be, if you take your Catholicism seriously, I think your loyalty to the federal government of the United States is going to markedly diminish. I don't know. You just saw this recently with, that horrible, my horrifically incompetent and callous senator, Kamala Harris, and she is my senator once more, said that you couldn't hold high public office if you were a Knight of Columbus. Are you kidding me? It's like the Know Nothing Party over again. I just think this is eventually going to force a decision among Catholics. You either are Catholic or you're first Catholic or you're first American. I think for a while, from the 50s to the 90s, people were like, oh, well, I can do both. I can walk and chew bubblegum. But really, it's apparent now that the civic religion of this country is antithetical, especially with people like Kamala Harris at the helm, is antithetical to what it means to be Catholic. Now, maybe in an ideal world, we can imagine some kind of liberal Republican Catholicism that would be more in line with Catholic social teaching. But this country isn't it. And I don't think that, I think we need to be loyal to our fellow citizens and remember that we can't commit acts of treason against them. But insofar as being loyal to the symbols of the overarching civic culture of this country, I think Catholics are going to be going back to how they really treated these things in the early 20th century as kind of extraneous baubles that are interesting and that we have some loyalty to, but because we have to, not really because they have some kind of spiritual dimension to them. Is that the last super chat? Maybe it is. If that's the last super chat, I guess I'll just answer more questions from the chat. Someone says, Judaism thesis, Christianity antithesis, Islam synthesis. Wouldn't you agree? I would agree that that's how a Muslim Hegelian would say things. But I mean, Islam coming after Christianity doesn't mean that it's actually answered a contention of Christianity. To the large degree, it really doesn't. It would be like saying Christianity thesis, Islam antithesis, Mormonism synthesis. Sure. That's, if you want to get that sequence down and you want to say that, okay, well, this is the way to go forward. Just because Mormonism came last, that's fine. I don't think that Islam answered any questions of Christianity any more than Mormonism answered questions that were brought up in Islam. I know that Islam referenced Christianity, but it referenced it with almost no knowledge to what Christians actually believe or taught, even at the time of Muhammad. So, I mean, maybe Muhammad was talking about some like crazy sect of Christians that only existed in the Middle East, only existed in the Arabian Peninsula in the 8th century. But if those are the Christians he's talking about, they aren't the Christian I am, and so to a large extent, Islam is not really something that can synthesize Christianity, but because in order to synthesize Christianity, you have to directly address the issues and problems it puts forward. Okay, so Zandra Gall for Australian $5. Are you aiming to debate any particular person in 2019? Who are the key movers in spreading progressivism that need to be challenged? Oh, excellent question. This is an amazing question because I can riff on this for a while. I'm just checking the other. I see some other chats that aren't super chats. I'm gonna have to answer this one before I go on. Well, okay. I'm not so sure how effective debates are. I mean, I had early in 2019. I had Ben Burgess on. I think that was last week sometime, and it was an all right conversation. I get very frustrated at Marxists, especially academic Marxists. Pardon me, because they treat everyone like idiots who aren't on the left, and because they just have these huge blind spots and they act like they've never really talked to people who don't directly come from, well, they feel like they've been educated how to answer criticisms of communism, but they never actually talk to any intelligent critics of communism, and there's a big difference. And I remember thinking after that, I'm like, I know that Zero Books people like Angela Nagel and Ben Burgess, like, I consider them to be valuable allies to have, but the conversations I have with them always don't seem to go, very far at all. As for, this is the problem though, Zendergall. The big movers in progressivism, like ContraPoints, like any of the, ContraPoints I wouldn't say is a big mover. Maybe he's they're a big mover relative to anyone else that ordinarily you come across in progressive YouTube. But people who, the Young Turks, ContraPoints, Chapo Trop House, all of these people in progressive internet media sphere, they will not talk to conservatives. They will certainly not talk to reactionaries. So we can't have a debate with the people who are in power. Now, we can't have a debate with like communists who are allied with the people in power, and it's valuable. It's incredibly valuable to get field testing for your ideas to see exactly how your enemy would react to an idea you have. I don't want to put that down at all. But we're not going to, we can't engage with the people who are in charge, because the people who are in charge don't want to talk. That's something that they only really had to do in the 90s. So, if I'm going to talk before I go on, Zendergall, if I'm going to go on and sort of speculate about like what needs to be done, like what areas of progressivism need to be targeted, the areas of progressivism that need to be targeted are white progressive college educated males and white progressive college educated females. The conservative movement needs to put a petition out to that group that is very, very hard to ignore and that is very, very respectable. And if it can convert even a small number of those people, it will pose a huge existential threat to the progressive coalition. And I think that is what we need to target. Now, I don't know how you target these people. I don't think anyone who listens to Chapo Trop House would ever tune into my channel, but that's the demographic that needs to be targeted. And I think it starts with progressive young men, and then it goes on to young women. But it's that key demographic, ethnically European, college educated, middle class to upper middle class. That's a key coalition member that the progressive coalition has that they should not have, because they haven't done anything to earn it. So thank you for that super chat. I will say this though, guys. I think 2019 is going to be a year for activism and getting our acts together in real life. Now, I don't mean this in the Jordan Peterson sense. I don't mean this in the like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Obviously, you should be already cleaning your room and thinking about working towards your professional success in your own lives. Internet's not a substitute for that. But what I'm talking about is actually making right-wing ideas a real-world activist force. I met up with some people in Washington, D.C., and I've met up with other people in California, and I've been talking to a lot of people in real life that watch my channel and that have their various ideas about this. And of course, you've got the very, very numerous but very, very quiet fans of Rod Dreher's Benedict option. They're kind of sitting around watching this stuff, and they're all thinking and talking about the same things. But at the end of the day, what the right needs to demonstrate in 2019 is that it can create something meaningful in real life, that it can create an organization that can lobby for effective change, or that it can create an organization that can contribute to a community and be a stakeholder in it. Not on an individual level, not in, I'm a Republican and I've made $1 million on Silicon Valley, here's a check for $10,000, but in a way that would excite young people and get them involved in that process under a banner of right-wing thought. I think that's really important. I think 2019 is the year that we try to experiment with something like that. And I think it's very, very possible that the internet can help with this. Now, progressive YouTube, they talk a good game about this stuff, but like, I think that the progressives, and I don't want to put down progressives because they're winning. And it never makes sense to put down people who are winning, right? Because then you're just putting down yourself. But I do think seeing their own activism, that it's just beset by their own emotions and personal dysfunction. And it makes it very, very difficult for them to organize and do anything effective on the ground. And I think that right-wingers might not have that problem. We might be able to just walk around that problem. Maybe it's very possible that that at least on sort of the personal emotional level, we have our shit a little bit more together, and we might be more effective in this regard. But at any rate, that needs to be done. So Julius Avola for $9.99. Thank you for your contribution. What would be, so I should say, before I say this, there's another super chat from Jackson White for $5. Thank you for the donation. It's great to get a super chat, even without a question. But with that, thanks. I'll go on to Julius Avola for $9.99. What would be your main idea in debating someone who was invested into the JQ being behind the deconstruction of the West? Okay, I mean the JQ. I mean, I mean, what would I be debating them on? I guess, right? Like, I'm not an expert on this stuff. No, I don't really want to be. I've never met. No one's ever explained to me this, and this would be my question. My only question is like, okay, so let's just assume everything about this question is correct. So you're telling me that like less than 1% of this population, like, totally subverted like a strong civilization. It's hard to believe, but more than that, I don't think that civilization is actually strong anymore. If you're saying that less than 1% of the population can do that, that's not that little tiny population's fault. That's our fault for not being strong enough to resist that. The way you handle any of these, and also, obviously, the second you talk about this stuff in public, you're next from a number of interactions in the mainstream that are very, very valuable, much more valuable than talking to the people who want to constantly talk about the JQ. But the way you would handle this, if it were true, and I'm not conceding it is I would make my society, my institutions, my community resistant. That's the solution. And that group is very, very, very well defended, and they will defend themselves if you attack them. You shouldn't attack any group, right? I don't verbally attack or physically attack any group. There's no condemnation. There's a blanket condemnation of violence on this channel. But like, if you were going to verbally attack somebody, they'll be the stupidest attack you'd ever made in your entire life, because that group does retaliate against defamation, as some organizations against defamation highly suggest by their very name. So just I don't know, like, there's so much to be gained from sidestepping that question and so little to be gained to actually confronting it, that I would need to understand why it's a thing, So I know why it's a thing, but I would need to make sure that the person actually is thinking properly about strategy and isn't somebody who's trying to excuse callous bigotry in the form of exploring privilege relationships. A B movie Paul for $2 says, a bit late, but congrats on getting married. Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been great I recommend everyone get married. Of course, I understand you can't just press a button and get married, but it's been really good these last 5 months. I'm really enjoying my time. Obviously, we're still up in the air with where we're going to live. Not that I broadcast that to YouTube, but it's been a lot of moving around, but still marital bliss is what it is. And so thank you very much for the congratulations. Okay. Moving on to the next one. Overman for $5 Australian. What would a synthesis of Islam and Christianity look like? I don't know. Maybe the Baha'i faith. I don't think they're really synthesizable. I think that basically, I really don't think that Islam confronts Christianity. I think Islam confronts Judaism. And to the extent that it mentions Christianity, it assumes that Christianity has to be like Judaism for the Romans, as if it were like some kind of tribal religion that enthroned Roman culture as opposed to Jewish culture. So it never, when you read the Quran, it never feels like whoever is speaking, Muhammad or God, depending on your beliefs. But whenever you read the Quran, it doesn't feel, obviously I don't believe God was speaking in the Quran, but when you read the Quran, it does not feel like the author is addressing Christianity, how it was practiced by Christians who were writing in the same century that Muhammad lived. So I see Islam less as an extension of Christianity and more as a extension of Judaism. I think Judaism had problems with it, and people wanted to expand it to other cultures, and Christianity chose one way to do this, and then afterwards, Islam chose another way to do this, both moving away from what Second Temple Judaism would have looked like. Now, synthesizing the two of them is a little bit like saying, like, well, how do I synthesize two people walking in the opposite direction? I guess you bring them back to the center, which I guess would be what Second Temple Judaism would look like. But the difficulty is that there's so many decisions where, like, they both just have opposite opinions, and that's what really characterizes them. Unless you just want to go for, like, blanket monotheism, right? Just go like monotheism, and then the theological questions that differentiate Islam from Christianity. Oh, those are just complicated. We won't answer them. I guess that's a way to synthesize it. But to me, that's more or less meaningless because most of the content of the religion comes from the distinctions that are found inside of those things. I don't know. I will say this about Islam, though. I don't think that Islam has found a solution to modernity, but it has preserved an element of itself that Christianity has had a very hard time preserving. It's preserved the spiritualism and the civilizational consciousness. Now, it's so funny because I heard Kurt Doolittle the other way, and I'm going to have a conversation with some of these proprietarian people at some stage. But I heard a conversation with him when he talked about Christianity. Now, originally, his first interaction when he was on, I think it was Red Eyes TV or something like that, he's like, oh, Christianity is a form of Abrahamism, right? Oh, brilliant, right? So I guess Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are all the same religion right now, which I don't even think he believes. But he talked about it just merely as an extension of Abrahamism, sort of making, Jewish or Hebrew descended religions sound more nefarious than they are. Then when he went on a Christian show, he was like, oh, no. Look, Christianity is awesome. It's not only is it awesome, it's optimal. That's another thing about, I think Doolittle's a little bit sloppy about how he uses words. I come from a background that largely focuses on optimization, and you don't just go around asserting something as optimal willy-nilly. It's because you like it. But now, Christianity, it was previously the bad Abrahamic religion. Now it's optimal, or at least the ethics are. And he's like, well, the thing that we have to get from Christianity is like the Jefferson Bible. Like what Jefferson Bible is essentially the teachings of Jesus with the miracles worked out, and the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, what's the problem with this? The Jefferson Bible and the Sermon on the Mount are what progressive Christianity is made out of. And by extension, it's also what modern progressivism is made out of. Modern progressivism is what you get when you take Sermon on the Mount ethics, discard all the spirituality out of that, and just preach sort of open mercy with no judgment, with no civilizational consciousness, and with none of the other teachings attendant to Christianity. I don't know if Kurt Doolittle realizes this, but every church that has gone down this road of Jefferson Bible plus Sermon on the Mount has ended up being an SJW church, being a progressive church, and supporting the very kinds of policies that Kurt Doolittle hates. So he obviously has something very, very wrong about what the cause of all this looks like. And I think that for Christianity in particular, the civilizational consciousness, well, part of that has to be people's past civilizational consciousness, but part of it's Christian too. That has to be integrated with the spiritual. It cannot be separated from that. And Islam realized this too, that if you discard the spiritual, you're not going to have collectivity. You're not going to have unification. You're not going to have collective consciousness and the ability to stand up for yourself, because it's all going to be absorbed into globalization and so on and so forth. Well, there's more and more super chats. Well, that's kind of good. Thanks, guys, for being so supportive. So thank you, Overman, for your contribution. Going on to YJHVY for $2. You think Protestantism derailed some European cultures? I think what you mean is, do you think Protestantism derailed some European culture? I mean, I don't think Protestantism is true. So inside that, I guess, like it implicitly derailed some European cultures. But that's neither. Yeah, I don't know if that's. I will say that. I mean, I'll say of the heresies that derived from Christianity, Protestantism in its pre-progressivized form did a pretty good job at carrying forward the civilization that it was entrusted with. You know, you look at places like Sweden and Norway and England and the lowlands. I mean, they're very well-run places. And until the 20th century, they were very Christian places as well. And I think that's something that, you know, you have to hand that to Protestantism. It preserved that. Now, I think there is a way that the theological mistakes of Protestantism can be rectified without necessarily destroying the unique Northern European cultures that I admire from afar very, very much. I think that's going to be something that it's not something that I can do. It's going to have to be something that people from a Northern European culture do and explore. Everyone needs to find a way to Christianize their ancestors, right? To bring their beloved ancestors into the light of the church, because I do believe, and I might be a heretic for saying this, I do believe that Christ ultimately will offer salvation to the righteous pagans. But that's an element of faith. I think that's an open-ended question in Christianity. And I think part of that process, though, is coming up with a narrative where your own culture story can be told through the larger spiritual struggle of Christianity and the church. So Julian Peacock for $10. Thank you for your contribution. Hey, Distributist, I hope you're having a good 2019 so far. I've been listening to Why Liberalism Failed during commutes and would like a recommendation on what to read next. Glory to God for all things. What to read next? God. I would maybe Nassim Nicholas Taleb. That was a pretty good book. He wrote Skin in the Game this year, and I thought it was brilliant. That and Why Liberalism Failed were probably my favorite books this year. There's this other book by this Israeli author that I'm in the middle of. I think it's called like The Beauty of Nationalism. I don't remember the guy's name, and I can't look for it right now. But maybe I can go to my Twitter account. You guys are going to see this, but who cares? I think it's Yoram something. Yeah, that's it. So this is the guy. Yoram Hazani. I was going to try to interview him, but I got caught up with his agent. And he wrote The Virtue of Nationalism. That is. He's an Israeli author. And he writes eloquently about how nationalism and group pride are essential for a people. And this just shows you, I mean, this is what I think people who are obsessed with the JQ will never realize, just how much learning there is that the Hebrew culture can bring to people of indigenous European descent. If you unify Hebrew actions with their teachings, I think you'll understand that it's a much more wholesome message, and that people can learn to love their own groups by witnessing how much the Jewish people love their own group. I mean, that's what everyone should do. They should see nationalism and then reflexively feel pride in their own peoples and want to thrive together. Or at least that's how we'd hope everything would work in a blessed world. Maybe not so much in our own fallen one. But thank you so much for your contribution, Julian. Wow, a $20 super chat from the Collier Report. $20. Keep doing what you do. Have a great 2019. Well, thanks for the super chat. I think 2019 is going to be a very interesting year. You know, I don't know. I think that it's the year that the right wing has tried a bunch of things that don't work. We know that electoral politics aren't really working, right? And they're certainly not going to work after certain demographic changes happen. We understand that being an edgelord in real life doesn't work. I think that a certain group on the right taught us that very recently. I'm not naming names here, but I think we all are thinking in the right direction. We're all thinking in the same direction. And but people still need to have community support in this world. And at some level, the community support is going to have to start increasingly being in real life, right? I see one of my Jewish followers in the chat saying cheers from Israel. Yeah, guys, here's what I said about the JQ. Let me take some time to praise Jewish people, but really, guys, though, I understand that a lot of the progressive forces that try to make indigenous European peoples feel shitty about themselves, I understand that they have a common ethnic origin. I get that. I get that it's frustrating. I get that means that a lot of people are hypocrites. But you have to look at a people's through the lens of their history, and you have to learn from the love that they have for themselves and reflect that in the love that you have for your own people. Now, I understand that I have some theological disagreements with Judaism. Like I said, I think that Christianity corrected that, and Judaism tried to correct that in a different, wrong way, a more incorrect way. But you really need to learn from people's love. And I think that I'm struck by admiration at Jewish people's love for their own people. They always say, there's Jewish guilt and there's white guilt. I hate the word white. I'd rather use indigenous European. But you know how what's white guilt means that you're ashamed for standing up for your ancestors, and Jewish guilt means that you're ashamed that you haven't stood up for your ancestors enough. I wish that indigenous Europeans would learn to be guilty in the way that Jews were guilty more. So I hope to continue to learn from the Jewish people. And I'm not trying to be like a normie-con. I'm really not. But so thank you, Collier Report. 2019 will be the year to show, I think the right wing needs to show that it can accomplish things, that it can do good. And I think the thing that kicked off 2019, the thing that will 2019 will be bookended between two events. And one of those events is Tucker Carlson's speech. I might just play it for the last 15 minutes. Who knows? It was a great speech he gave as a response to Mitt Romney, where he overviewed the exact ways in which people in which conservatism needs to distinguish itself. We are for the family, we are for the people first, capitalism later. And that's quite essential. Okay, I'm going to go on because I'm a little bit running out of time here. A lot of stuff got from $20. Okay, Charlemagne for $5. What is the Christian conception of the feminine ideal that can oppose the progressive ideal of the liberated woman for modern women? Well, I don't know. I think that, it's tough, I guess, because I think that we had a concept of the feminine ideal from the early 20th century that was quite. And I'm going to do a video on this probably in my Trad Codex series when I get to BioShock Infinite. I've noticed and I'm going on a digression a little bit here, but I've noticed that in the Trad Codex series, originally I was going to do old, new, old, new, old, new, old, new. But then I realized that I'd probably just do new, 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 new. And when I made the subject of the video about a new piece of media, I'd implicitly go back and review an older piece of media and compare it to those things. So for instance, the one I'm releasing in 17 minutes is about H.P. Lovecraft, but I go back and I look at Peter Bruegel and Hieronymus Bosch's pictures. They're great horrific pictures of the end of the world or the Garden of Earthly Delights, and I use that as a staging area. And I'm going to do the same thing with BioShock Infinite, looking at the video game BioShock Infinite and comparing it to Art Nouveau and the concepts of what the West was just before World War One, of the Art Nouveau kind of Edwardian period, and I think that when we think of the feminine ideal, aside from like 1950s relapses, we're really thinking of the concept of the feminine ideal that you see in like a Mucha painting, that you see in like Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, if you prefer video games, that you see in the Gibson Girl, the kind of very independent, very intelligent, accomplished woman who's nonetheless demure and in need of a man. And I think elements of that can go on to construct a new model for the woman. I think that the internet has a lot of difficulty. Now, I'm going to talk about our friend Nick Fuentes and the sort of the e-thought purge. There were a lot of valuable women that were on YouTube that are not here anymore on the right. Some people blame that on the thought purge. I don't personally, but or by the thought purge I mean like people going after female content creators that were accused of sort of thriving on their looks more than on their content. What female YouTubers present is a model of femininity. Now, there has to be sort of lines in the sand here. There has to be a difference between here is a traditional lifestyle that I'm living, and I'm sharing this with you to show that it is possible. Because believe me, people, you're not going to get the message that this is possible by looking at the mainstream media. They're never going to show you the successful housewife. They're never going to show you the happy woman with 6 children, right? Who goes to church 2 times a week, who prays the rosary. They're never going to show you that. So insofar, or they're never going to show you the virtuous 20-something who's waiting for her husband, right? That's not part of the narrative. That's not part of what the media is going to show you. So if you can show that via YouTube, that's great. That's amazing. And there's a reason why people watch that. They watch that to remind themselves that these women exist. Now, this can very easily track into sort of a pornographic dimension, and that's why we have to be careful of it. But there has to be rules in place. There has to be aspirational guidelines so that people can show people a virtuous life without submitting to the exhibitionism, the sort of pornographic dimension, the sort of sensationalism that it seems that the internet so want to make us sort of fall into. But yeah, excellent question. I mean, again, like this will have to be developed by women. But I look at someone like Ayla Stewart. I think, I've had some disagreements with Ayla over the whole race issue. But I can't think of a single thing she says that's really bad. It seems that she's just a housewife that wants to make sure that her culture is passed down and that her people thrive. I mean, I can hardly blame anyone for that. TB88 for $5. I understand not charging a machine gun nest on open ground, Distributist, but eventually you have to address the machine gun nest question. I think that's a JQ thing. You have to address the machine gun nest question by pointing out the area where the machine gun blast will hit you. And then you have to circle around the machine gun and attack from a different angle, so the machine gun is no longer firing on that area, right? You just have to describe the places that will get you killed if you walk. What are those places? I don't think I need to tell anyone here what can get you banned off the internet for saying, especially about certain groups that we may have mentioned, if only implicitly in this talk. Look, you can if you this is like one of those, if you don't attack directly, there's very little that can be done to hurt you. And there's so much more that needs to be done on the right now in order to build up what we have. But thank you for your contribution. TB88. Yeah, I mean, okay, how about this? Like, what person is the model for addressing the blank question? Like, What is the model channel who talks all the time about this third rail and like is super effective? Because I haven't seen one. The most effective people, even in the racialist movements, don't talk about this issue, and for a reason that you're alluding to right here. Okay, so TKUA $1 for $1.99. Thank you very much. Will you have Jonathan Pohl on your stream? Yes, he's on my list. I can't remember for the life of me what he wrote. I know the name's on my list. I haven't contacted him. I think he would be a good guest. I just can't at this point remember exactly who he is. But thank you very much for your contribution, TK. We are coming up a little bit on time here. 10 more minutes. I will probably leave 2 minutes more on the clock so that people can watch the other video that's premiering in 10 minutes. I need to scroll down. So another super chat, Kiewich for New Zealand $20. Just joined. Apologies if you covered this already. Thoughts on Tucker's monologue, particularly the response he got from Shapiro. Okay, well, I mean, I already said Tucker's monologue is going to be that which kicks off 2019 right-wing activity. Everybody, and I think from the right wing, from the artist formerly known as the alt-right, to religious tradcons like myself, to non-insane neoconservatives, are going to use Tucker's speech as a launching point for what we want to accomplish in 2019. What we want to accomplish in 2019 is a movement that credibly works for people's interests and is not dogmatically chained to some kind of abstract idea like market capitalism. That's not going to work. That's a losing strategy. We need to demonstrate that we can organize groups like this. We need to demonstrate that we can speak in language about people, about communitarian survival in the 21st century, and about carving out spaces for people to have genuine lives where they can pass wealth on to their descendants, and not simply get a paycheck from a Silicon Valley company and blow it all on consumer products because they can't buy a house because they live in a place where the housing value is so high because they live next to a Silicon Valley company. That's ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. And it can't be a thing. So that'll be something. At any rate, I think we're winding down. I want to say one more thing about the Kiewich thing. The response he got from Shapiro and Jeffrey Goldberg and David French was atrocious. It was insane. It was a very common sense speech, and they went to town because he wasn't. Because I remember this one thing. It was something like, what Ben Shapiro leaves out is the role of personal responsibility, which matters way more. What Tucker Carlson left out of his speech about how families needed to come before free markets was just personal responsibility, guys. Like, personal responsibility matters way more than government. It matters way more than institutions. And if you live in the real world, the world of adults, you know that hard work and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, that matters way more than politics. And I remember reading it and going like, okay, well, I mean, aside from being the most boomer thing ever written, nothing wrong with boomers. But aside from kind of like embodying like a clear stereotype in that dimension, like, why is National Review, if National Review believes that like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is the only thing that matters and politics has no bearing, why is it a political magazine and not a self-help magazine? If politics didn't matter, then you could just let the left do whatever it wanted and that would be fine, because all you'd have to do is just work hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you'd be golden. So you could basically just turn, National Review into the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the blog. And and this sort of just comes down to the farcical nature of this whole thing. You can't become non-political in sort of a highly contentious political environment. Politics forces you to participate. And that's why the Benedict option, if something like the Benedict option is ever going to work, it's going to largely focus around creating political barriers and political coalitions that people can actually use. People go, oh, well, the Democrats are about to lock us out of political power. Well, I'm not so sure about that, because if the progressives get that much power, their coalition is going to fracture, and we'll have another iteration of these questions. But to my mind, the response to Tucker's speech totally discredited people like French and Jonah Goldberg in the conversation. It was ridiculous. I don't know how these people maintain relevance anymore, and they certainly don't seem relevant to me. They don't talk about anything that makes a difference. They talk about reforming entitlements, which you can never reform, and they talk about winning elections that they can't win anymore. And that's it. So what are you offering? Like, National Review used to be, you write in the National Review if you want to communicate with the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is the person that wins elections for the counter-progressive team. Well, guess what? The National Review no longer has an ear to the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is no longer a neocon party. So it's useless on that front. So all it is like a housing. All it is like it's basically a retirement program for middle of the road rightists who are still stuck in the 1990s and think that they can somehow argue people out of, they think they can argue the left out of cultural dominance. But you can't argue the left out of cultural dominance. You'll never be able to do that. But I think that we're winding down now. I'm seeing more comments about. I think we all have the same emotions about this. I'm winding down the speech. So any last super chats? I have to kill this in 5 minutes so I don't run over with the other premiere that I'm running. How would you feel about one party theocracy governed by this principles of secular Coranism? There is no such thing as secular Coranism, and I'm not paying a jizya. Thank you very much. I'm not paying I'm not accepting. Look, there's lots of religions that want to be theocratic over me. Only one of them wants me to charge me a big hefty fee for practicing my religion. So I think that if Muslims want to advocate for Sharia, they're going to have an uphill battle, even in a reactionary coalition. I've heard about Bill Whittle. There should be a roast of National Review. That's what basically everyone on the right wing needs to make sure, that National Review is thoroughly mocked, and is mocked for a few more months over this, because they are completely irrelevant at this stage. I have no idea when anyone reads them. It just basically become sort of like this retirement community, like I said. And I even feel, and I really like Roaming Millennial, but sometimes I feel the same way, that the audience and the way she talks, she's really reassuring older white male boomers who are Republican, that like republicanism is going to, in its current form, is going to sell to like a younger, less European, and in Roaming Millennial's case, only marginally less European. It's going to sell to the republicanism in its old form. It's going to sell to a younger, less European demo, which it's not, and which it doesn't. So, I mean, that's just not, it's not going to happen, guys. But what is going to happen in 2019, and I hope this, is that the right is going to learn activism in 2019. That's the only thing left for it to do. It has to learn activism. It has to learn solidarity. Yes, I am planning on doing a video on Mencius Moldbug, but believe it or not, I can only do one video at a time. So if I make a video about Lovecraft, I have to put off the video about Mencius Moldbug. But with that being said, guys, I thank you for the super chats, and also thank you for stopping the super chats as we were at the end of the stream. I wish you guys the best of Sundays. I hope you had a great day and a great rest of the week, and I'll see you again in several weeks for the next edition of Distributist Answers, or Dist Ans. Have a great night.